This is the Educational Triage Podcast. Welcome. We invite you to come along with us on an exploration of interviews, issues, and other exciting and relevant topics in education, especially alternative education. They say alternative education is a laboratory for mainstream education. Why? Well, join us every week and listen in as Philip Summers
Aloha.
and I, Tony Hunt, jump in feet first to discuss issues that may affect our classes, students, communities, as well as our teaching. Please subscribe if you enjoy and find relevance in what you experience here. And if you haven't left a quick review, please do. We appreciate your candor and insights so we can improve as we move forward. Now, let's see what's on board today. And welcome back, everybody, to the Educational Triage Podcast. And this week, we're looking at project-based learning, or PBL. And to help enforce, reinforce, develop, and encourage our thoughts, we have the very thoughtful Mr. Philip Summers. Hey, Philip.
Wow. If I do it right, you're correct. Aloha. At least we can all explore it together.
Indeed. Indeed. Okay, so alternative ed is seen as one of the leading users and developers of project-based learning. And so I thought that in order to begin with project-based learning, I'm sure that there are people out there who aren't really positive what project-based learning is. So I thought we'd go over the key concepts and then we can move on. So project-based learning are projects that are designed to simulate real-world problems or scenarios. And they also are meant to incorporate learning to make it more meaningful and relevant. So you're not learning in a vacuum. Everything is not siloed. Everything comes into context and is aligned with whatever you're doing. And students take an active role in their learning, and they choose how they're going to solve and approach problems. There's collaboration, so there's teamwork, and we're going to get into that, encouraging students to work together, share ideas, and learn from each other. There's critical thinking, so they're required to analyze the information and to think critically and apply their knowledge to solve problems. And then they also will have opportunities to reflect on what the process was, the outcomes, what's working, what's not working, and so how do we resolve those problems at the same time? Is there anything you want to add?
About project-based learning?
About the
No,
the basic characteristics.
basic characteristics. Yeah. About project-based learning. It's really fun. And
It can
it's,
be.
all that good stuff. But yeah, if you want to build something, create something, project-based learning can really lead to great adventures. There's a ton of mistakes to be made, but that's part of the learning process, and that's what I really like about it. Because you can all look at this thing that you've a certain thing you've designed on a maker lab and look at it, comes out looking really blobby. You think to yourself, well then, we have to adjust some things. And it's kind of like, well, of course we do, because that's how it's done. It's not so schooly, and it's really exciting to create things, especially in a group of people. So
Right.
yeah.
Right. But a maker space would not be a project-based learning
Well,
environment.
it could
It
be
might
if you
be
put
a
it together
component.
yeah, you're putting together something, and you need pieces of the maker lab, and you designed it. It comes out to be looking not quite the same. Let's say, for example, you're making a trebuchet that the class wants to find. They can launch the trebuchet. The project of launching something like an apple to the furthest distance. Well, if you have a maker lab, then you'd have to maybe make some components that would make that work. So, working in a
What was
group,
that
I can
word
see
you
that.
used?
Trebuchet, a catapult. It's actually different than a
Okay.
catapult, but
Thank you.
I'm sorry, in the Middle Ages, they used the trebuchet to launch huge things at the
Mhm.
castles, and if you make mini versions, you can see, mathematically and mechanically how things work. It's fascinating. There's actually a lot of
Right.
schools that do the
Well,
project.
because if you're going to do one of those, then you're going to have to incorporate physics. You're going to have to look at the materials that are
Yeah,
used as well. So you're going to have to look at weights. You're going to have to look at
yeah.
lengths. So there's a lot of mathematics, I think. But then
Mhm.
the
Trial
materials,
and
I
error.
mean, how do you get the materials? How do you figure out which materials are there?
Yeah.
How are you going to
What
adapt
strong
those
materials?
materials in order to
Yeah.
form what you need?
Mhm.
Is
Yeah.
how do you
And then,
transport everything? There are a lot of components, I would think, just
uh,
in
oh,
that
a
right there.
ton. You have to make it big enough to launch, a 7 ounce apple, or maybe a six
Hmm.
ounce apple,
Right.
and you have to make it go a distance, not like 14 feet ahead into the dirt, you know. So it has to be kind of scaled to work like in that realm. Yeah, I don't know exactly how it would be, but yeah, it would be fascinating to start to undertake. My mind's already starting to try to figure it out. So there you go.
There we
I'm a
go.
learner.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, for the process, in order to get going on project based learning,
Mhm.
you're going to have to do the launch, which
Yeah.
is you introduce the project with some kind of entry event that sparks curiosity and interest. So, when you talk about the trebuchet or the catapult,
Yeah. Yeah.
that, okay, investigate. Students have to explore the topic. They need to ask questions and gather information. And so they're going to be doing research.
Yeah.
And this is a
There's
good place for
modes
you
to
to
this.
learn this is a good place for you to even teach citations so they can go back,
Mm.
so they can, so when, not just because of what's
Yeah.
in the news, but also because they need to remember and have recall to those resources.
Right.
So if they lose something, that there's something there that they can go back and they can double check their information.
Yeah, some kind of note-taking thing. Remember that, kids? All those, I hate to
Yeah.
take notes, but you can't recall it all if you don't take notes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where journal writing research
Mhm.
helps. And that is, today I went to blank and I discovered blank about blank. And that way they can say that they went to this one site. This is what they found. And they can do a little
Mhm.
thing about that so they know what's there. And then they can do some marginalia about how that applies.
And writing
Create.
skills come into that too, because, I can't get into your brain, so you have to communicate those ideas to me.
Right.
So writing skills are important. Use specific words and forms, please. Yeah.
And then they start to develop a product or a solution that demonstrates understanding of the problem.
Yeah.
They're going to present in some way their work to an audience and whoever that audience is. And then they're going to reflect on the learning process so that they can figure out what could have been better, what they could have done differently,
Mhm.
maybe what
Always.
would have worked well.
Mhm.
If they had to redo it,
What would you
maybe.
have done
Exactly.
differently?
And maybe
Yeah.
where did you waste steps?
Yes.
So,
How can you economize?
yeah. So the pitfalls are students may be the superficial engagement where students are so focused on the end product that they don't pay attention to what they're actually learning.
Mhm, mhm.
So the content and the
Yeah.
skills and understanding aren't really there. So that's why maybe doing the journaling on the way, because
Mhm.
even if they're going to be doing some kind of a scientific experiment, they need to be journaling because they need to be able to replicate
Yeah,
this.
especially in a scientific experiment, you
Right.
have to replicate.
And so maybe the solution, um, you can bypass superficial engagement by ensuring that the projects are designed to address essential learning objectives. And provide support for those key concepts as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and I was just thinking of a project that I used just to get I had the boys, the
Hmm.
adjudicated boys, and we made models, military models. We were studying Vietnam, and I had some models of I had a Huey, and I can't recall. Oh, F4. And we made models, and the whole reason that I had them make the models was because first off, they're dudes and they loved it. For the most
Hmm.
part, they were really into it. You know, just one of those crowds. Secondly, it was clean up. You know, it was set up, work on the instructions, take your time, wait for parts to dry, paint them beforehand, plan the steps, go through it. What are you going to do this day? And then clean up. You know, it took us, you know, maybe 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks to produce a really, really nice 148 scale model, and the kids were uber proud of it, and they did it because they just had to plan everything meticulously, and then they had to make sure,
Hmm.
for instance, you don't put the clear parts on before you spray paint it flat coat, or you know, guess what happens. You know, and they had to know all this stuff, and it really helped them, and it was just simply teaching them how to do things in the proper order, and that was the whole thing. Plus we produced these models that we used
See,
in
maybe
class.
that would be a good preliminary step before going
Yeah.
into project-based learning, because project-based learning isn't just putting together a model. It's
No, no.
actually spending the entire day working on a project. So everything that you do during the day is relevant to that project. So,
Yeah,
for
that would be
example,
something.
and I'll put the notes down below in the show notes, there's that one school in Michigan, a middle school, where they decided they were going to do project based learning for sixth graders who were
Mhm.
entering into middle school. And so they started out with cooking for the first, as one of the first projects that they were going to do. So they outlined they were going to do cooking. They were going to have to, science was aligned with it. So their science classes, their math
Oh, yeah.
classes, everything that they did was aligned with what they were doing. And so the whole day, even the field trips were planned out. So the students were all going to be doing something along those lines, and they knew what it was. So there was a relevancy to the science, there was a relevancy to the mathematics class, there was a relevancy
Mhm.
to the English class. So they knew exactly what they were doing and how to put everything together. So it's not just taking a model and following the instructions, but I think that that
Mhm.
would be a really good component to it, because then you talk about the technical writing, you talk about why certain things have to be put into certain steps. That also
Right.
goes with
Why
the
is it in
scientific
steps?
method.
Yeah, what comes before what? What do you need to know before you can know more? Yeah.
Right.
And
And
how do you
so,
know that too? The mode of investigating that patiently and calmly,
mhm,
yeah. They don't
yeah,
have that. They have how do I get an A? If I what what four things do I have to do to get an A? It's like, well, it's kind of
exactly.
not like that. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what we're looking for here is more mastery.
Yeah. That's
And
it.
it doesn't matter
Mastery.
if you get everything right,
Yeah.
it's the process. Did you
And
follow the
proficiency's in there.
process?
Yeah.
Are you putting
Yeah.
everything together as it should be? And in the
Yeah.
reflection, what have you realized? So that it's not only thoughtful in process, but it's also thoughtful in the execution and the reflection. And
Yes. And it incorporate. Yeah. And go ahead. You may say it.
and it also teaches them how to delegate and distribute. And I think we might be getting into this. Yes, we are. Delegate and work with participation from everybody in your team,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
That's a tough one.
that's a very tough one. We're going to get into that.
Yeah.
So,
That's a, yeah.
oh,
And because a lot of us just don't know how to do that. I mean, we need to be
mhm.
taught that too.
I think a lot of teachers, they really want to do collaborative learning. But I think we
Yeah.
have a lot of parents who don't like collaborative learning because they don't want their child
Oh, well.
to be dependent on other people. They want their kid to be the star. They want their kid to be able
Mm.
to do things independently.
Yeah.
In other
Well, the
words,
system's
with
set up
their
that way,
help,
you
not
know?
with the help of somebody else in the class who may not know as much as the parents know.
Yeah, it's interesting to note, though, too, at the end of this all, when you're trying to apply for college, you're never looked at as the part of a group. It's like your name, and here you are, and your birth
Right.
date, and what have you done? So it does kind of drive that. Interesting, yeah. But you're right. That happens.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to plan these things with a clear purpose so that they understand what the
Hmm.
purpose is. So you need to have the objectives out there for them,
Yeah.
and you need to communicate those clearly. So before you even begin, that needs to be communicated. And what are the expectations and what's the relevancy? If a student doesn't see
Yeah.
relevance to what they're doing, their their capabilities kind of go down a little bit of a slope because they don't see why they should put forth the energy into what you're
Relationships,
doing.
rigor, and relevance. The
There we
three
go.
R's. Yeah, I mean, got the kids got to know. It's like, why am I doing this? Is just not going to drive you very long or very
No, no. But if everything's clear and
far.
if everybody's in the same boat, there's going to be days, I mean, where you walk in and you go, oh my God. But,
Yeah, you don't have to
it,
be on all the time, but
right. So,
it has to be interesting. So that's the other thing about project based is a lot of times you can kind of lend itself to student interests. You know, if you want the kids to get involved, say what could we do? How could we make this into a project?
and
You know?
that would be where you take a look at the student map that you've made for each student and you figure
Yeah,
out how that might apply. So
or the groups. Yeah,
now
some years you wouldn't even try
in your planning, you need to make sure that things are clear, concise, and that
Yeah,
they have clear direction. And
yeah,
so you want to make sure that you have scaffolding activities, checkpoints, benchmarks, resources, and maybe you're going to
feedback.
hit a snag and you brainstorm with the students. What are some of the things that we find that we need? How do we get those? So maybe
I like that.
you may even plan for those snags if you can.
Plan on
Be-
one happening or a couple.
Mhm.
Yeah, use them as the learning, not the roadblock.
Now, unequal participation. This is the one that clinches everybody.
Yeah.
Why should I do it? He's going to do it all anyway. They're too bossy. Why should I do it? They're not the boss of me. I'll tell you, I had one student refuse to participate with the rest of his team because he said he did all the research and they didn't do any of it. No, because they
Mhm.
were each doing their own component, because they were doing the mathematics, they were doing the designs, they were doing
Oh.
everything else. And then they had to come together to engage each other to find out what they had so that they could combine their information in
Hmm.
creating their project. And he refused to do that with them because they were not allowed to have his research because he did it and they didn't help him. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
If you're making the same face that Philip is, that was the same face I made. So I sent them off
Right.
and I told them to come to an agreement. And three of them came back and said, this person is unwilling to budge. And I said, okay.
Wow.
So I joined. We went through this whole brouhaha until finally it became apparent that this person was never going to engage with the rest of the team and they weren't going to do it. So they ended up being fired.
Mhm.
I had a chair thrown at me across the room, and that person was removed from the premises. And then they came back, apologized, and demanded that they be able to do the project on their own. So they were given something completely different. And
Not
the
a
other,
team player.
yeah. And
Wow.
I did give his research to them to finish. Okay.
Yeah.
So, you have this thing where people feel that they need to dominate and that they need to be the ones to take over. So this is where
Or they're just lazy in high school. They just go, oh yeah,
yeah.
you get that done, you get that done. I mean, I did that same project thing in high school, and as a 16-year-old, I wasn't a great taskmaster, so I ended up doing the whole project.
But if you
So
go around and you talk to people and you say, okay, here are the different roles
yeah.
and here are your expectations.
There you go, because you said that. Make it clear. Yeah, and there it is. You
If you
define
have
how this
clear
thing
roles
works.
and clear expectations, if
Mhm.
little Dobby Dooby doesn't want to do their part, then they are the ones that are going to be the weak link. And you ask the others, how are they going to deal with that? Because Dobby Dooby is now off to the side and Dobby Dooby doesn't get the grade. Dobby Dooby
Is
doesn't
that what
get the
his name was?
participation points. Dobby
Is that my
Dooby
alias?
gets to do nothing. And while Dobby Dooby is off sulking, the rest of them are collectively working together.
Dobby Dobby Doo.
So,
Sorry.
Dobby Dooby, you might find something else for them to do, which is probably not as fun, but it's still relevant to whatever it is so that they're still working on that process. You
Yeah, you
don't,
got to figure out something. I just got to worry about their future. It's like, well, you're going to be a lone wolf. However, some people are. You
they
know what?
are.
I don't have to say, you have to get along with people. It's like, dude, I work hard to get along with people. You may not, I, I don't know. Some days I don't want to get along with people, so I get you.
Yeah. I mean, I was telling you that I met a former student for coffee today, and he looked at me and said, "Dude, you are not a people person." And I said, "Oh, why would you say that?" He said, "Oh, you made that so apparent in class." He said, "It's not that you weren't approachable. It's just that we could tell when you were irritated and had enough." So, um,
Oh, wow. Well, yeah, we're
but
humans.
he said, you helped us. I mean, you did a lot for us. But when there was enough, there was enough. You didn't put up with a whole bunch of extra stuff. So, and it really depended on the day. Um, Now, how are you going to assess everything? Where does the assessment come in? Do you have ongoing assessment? Do you have rubrics so that they can look and they can monitor and adjust and learn how to monitor and adjust? Are you going to teach that? Is it going to be open ended so that if they need to adjust that they can raise whatever it is and they can improve their scores as they move along? So,
Always, always. Yeah. And the thing about just the dynamic of getting through the group, it's the same as the end of the project. There's going to be failures
mhm,
and there might be relationship failures. But if you see the group really trying to break through, or they're just not getting along, or they don't get along in the end, but you can kind of see how that worked. It's sort of like, yeah, see work. You didn't do really well, but you did struggle through this and did learn some things too. The objective wasn't met per se, but you're still graded because you guys struggled through it and you did learn some things about it. You weren't per se very successful because it's really hard as a teenager to park like ego or fear. A lot of kids are scared. Like the kids who, I can't do a project if I get anything less than an A. I'm gonna, or an A plus now for that matter. They hand out A pluses. So if you get less than an A plus in a class,
mhm,
it can put you below a 4 point. But there's some
yeah.
serious concern there. So yeah,
And I
it,
think in
I
two
would definitely
weeks,
put that. Yeah.
in 2 weeks'
Go.
time, you and I are going to be talking about grading and assessment too, aren't we?
Yeah, yeah. It and it's really important to grade everybody as individuals, not per se as the group or the bell curve or the because kids are all over the board.
Right. But you
Ability,
still need to have those
emotional
clear
maturity.
objectives.
Yes, there should be something that they're working towards, so you can say,
Hmm.
here, again, focus on this, and,
And I think
yeah.
you brought up something that was really important, and that is, how do you teach relationships? How do you teach getting along with people? How do you teach
Right.
problem solving, not just with mathematics, not just with a piece of silly putty, but
Hmm.
how do you resolve issues within your team? How do you resolve
Yeah.
and try to have things going on? Because even though
Yeah.
you're not privy to other people's private lives, what are the things that might happen? And this is where I would say that positive peer culture might actually come into play in some ways. And so if you
Yeah.
need to look at that, look at Henry Vorath, or you can read Joe McQueen's book.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, just handling those situations and coming up with a method that's that is, I don't want to say continuous, but it's something that they can do and that becomes a norm in the class.
Well, yeah, and let's not forget that these are kids and up
Hmm.
to the age of 18 and maybe 19. And
Maybe
so
20.
they're still not mature. And they've gone from a dependent relationship where they know who's the boss, mom and dad.
Hmm.
Then they go to the teacher and they know who's the boss, the teacher. And so they can always defer to that. And you throw them in those environments where now you're working with peers, people of equal status and equal power. And they don't have that North Star. A lot of the kids need, well, actually, all of them, we all do need training at that point to know how to get along with people and accept them for what they do and not impose upon them, and at the same time, keep your boundaries clear, because we just don't know how to do it. We're growing up.
And I think that's where your ability to be the Goodyear blimp and just sort of hover around and come around so
Right.
that when they need you to pop in and offer advice, a little nudge here and there, and then pop back up into the sky to oversee everything. And they all know that you're there,
Right.
but it gives them that sort of safety, that cloud of safety.
That I hadn't thought about. That's absolutely right. Because when I'm in a classroom, I don't sit at the desk. I wander.
Hmm.
I try not to creep, but, but and if I know the class, if I'm a sub, it's kind of like, because they're going, why is this guy just wandering? But if I know the class, everyone knows I never sit down. I'm with them. I'm over there. I'm doing this. So that's kind of how you're right.
Hmm.
Kind of the I'm here if I need to be, but I don't want to be.
And every
You can
time, every
handle it.
once in a while, you kind of crash land and you say, "What's going on here?"
Yeah.
And you check in with every one of them and you see
Yeah.
what's happening. And a lot of times everything is going just fine. And then you leave, and 2 seconds later, it's like, "Hey, we have a question."
That's a
So,
good one. That's true.
it happens. Okay. Now, time management. You're going to have to look at your time management. So, if projects are taking a lot longer than you had thought in your particular area, or if you're struggling so that the students just they're moving at a slower pace, maybe some students are hitting it and they're doing really well. Come up with something else that they could be doing. Have you thought about technical writing? Can they put into steps exactly what they did that day and write down and what the possible implications of what they did or what they discovered are? Can they make note cards out of the research that they did? If they're taking way too long, find out why. What what would they need in order maybe to speed things up? Or maybe you just didn't allot the right amount of time. And so this can be a combination discussion for
That's
everybody.
true.
And
That is
so
true.
if you're unwilling to ask the students for feedback, you've got an issue on your hands, and the issue is you. So you need to be able to say, okay, so what happened today? Did today work or did today not work? Maybe a good assessment for the day would be the students grade the day and grade the use of time. And that way, while
Hmm.
you're developing this, because you've got to look at things as always in development, maybe
Ah, just gonna say that.
maybe you say, give today a grade, not on your work, but on what the expectations were, how much time you had,
Hmm.
and how you feel. Do you feel as though you were able to use your time to your best benefit? Yes or no? If not, why? And you have them type that in and shoot that off to you if you're using Jigsaw, if you're
Hmm.
whatever Jamboard, whatever it is.
It's important to understand that, to use an analogy in writing, I think Hemingway said it. Somebody can correct me. He's never finished with a work. He just decides when to stop and submit it.
Hmm.
So if time and the result can't be, they're not the same at all. If your due date is 2 weeks from now and you want them to create this thing, and by 2 weeks, some of them haven't created that thing, that just means that their process was different. And it may be that they were not doing it correctly to the point where it almost is like malfeasance. It's like, yeah, that's just horrible. But it could be that they took it off in a different tangent and they're creating a different sort of approach to it. They just haven't enough time because they digressed and moved forward and did things like that, as the process demands when you're working with a group. So the deadline kind of has to be thrown out in a way without telling them.
I think I think you hit on something really good there, and that is because you want it to happen in a certain way doesn't
Yeah,
mean it has to happen in that way.
right.
There are several
Including the
ways.
teacher.
There are so many different ways to approach a
Right,
problem or an issue
right.
or to create something. And let the students teach you so that you learn at the
Yeah.
same time. Teachers are lifelong learners. So you should always be open to what they're there to teach you. And maybe you might have some epiphanies, as will they, as you go along. And
Hmm.
so that's why you require their feedback. They require your feedback. Think of it as, think of yourself as a fungi. And
No. Okay. Good.
it's a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
So, and hopefully you will
Hmm.
grow on them and they will like it and it's beneficial. Um,
Yeah, I
so,
like that whole approach. It just makes so much more sense because you have an out or you have an expectation of what the output's supposed to be, and that
yeah,
just limits the whole process. Because as a teacher, yeah, okay, you got a good batting average, but you don't hit home runs every time you get up to bat.
you don't,
Nope.
you don't. You
Lots
have
to
different
learn,
pitchers,
lots
you
to
have different weather,
change.
you have breezes, you
Mhm.
have all kinds of variables
All
that
kinds of
enter into the
technology comes
situation.
along,
Oh, yeah.
changes everything. Oh, almost sounds like teaching. Wait.
So, limited resources. So, maybe you don't have all the resources that you need. What
Yeah,
can you do without those resources, or how are you going to overcome those? This is a great lesson in problem solving.
innovation, just wow. I don't have
Um,
what I need, so how can I make it?
right. So maybe you build that into the lesson, or maybe you need to, while you're doing the planning, because project-based learning can't be, it can be done on the fly, but you've got to be really quick to foresee and and prophesize what's needed long before it's needed so that you have everything available.
Mhm.
And then there's the resistance to change. And some
Hmm.
students need things to be one, two, three. Some teachers need things to be ABC.
I've always
Believe
done it
me,
this way.
Yes, we've always done it this way. Why do we need to change? In fact, teachers tend to be the most change resistant people I have ever met. They
Oh
are
my
very
gosh.
controlling.
Yeah.
So, um, professional development, look for professional development. Where can you go to learn more about it? Um, and
Right.
just be intrigued. Allow yourself to be open to ideas and work with people. Don't be little Dobby Doo who needs to set off to the side and do their own project.
I thought
Um,
about that because one of the things I like about being a teacher is that I like to bring what's outside of the classroom inside,
mhm,
because that's actually what we're supposed to be learning about. I'm not you're not learning about the subject, you're learning about the subject as it relates to the world. So when the
exactly.
world comes in, like my Everest project, when I latched onto that and found out about the science in it, the geography, the anthropology, the whole nine, it's like, wow, this thing's loaded.
Mhm,
The project was to climb the mountain, basically pretty simple, but along the way, it was
right.
pretty complicated.
So what we're talking about then is we're talking about creating an environment of student-centered learning.
Yep.
There's implementation. We've talked about a little bit about that, community engagement, flexible scheduling,
Relevance.
multidisciplinary integration, and you'll
Yeah.
see a little bit more about that, technology integration, and alternative assessment methods. So,
Mm.
the reason why I flew
Wow.
through those. Oh, professional development for educators is another big one. And that's a great one just to throw
Ah.
out. Give me some projects that are real world projects that students will be interested or intrigued
Hmm.
in, and who would like to work with me on something like this. And how do we put this together? Because I'd like to do a multi skill thing. Um, and there's also metacognition and doing the reflective piece. So here
Yeah.
is I'm gonna give a couple of and I have some resources down below in the show notes. And as we run out of time, because we're running short, I want to keep this well under an hour. Here's one project that is an example, and it's the
Mm.
Environmental Sustainability Project.
Yeah.
And students are tasked with addressing a specific environmental issue in their local community, such as waste reduction, water conservation, or renewable energy. So, students would conduct research on that environmental issue. They examine its causes, impacts, and potential solutions. They can gather data through interviews, surveys, or field visits. So, what are some ideas that you might have for your students doing this?
Right.
Students, and the students create a comprehensive sustainability plan that include practical steps for addressing the issue. Now, we're not expecting them to create some kind of sustainability initiative that's going to be undertaken by the community, the state, or the city. We want them to actually
No.
learn about what it takes. And if
Mhm.
they do a good enough job, then maybe it is something that you present.
I
But
mean, yeah, there could be some real new ideas,
oh, yeah,
from
definitely.
a way different points of view. I've kind of exhausted mine, so I'm looking to other people. Yeah.
So propose and implement recycling programs, awareness campaigns, or designing eco
Right.
friendly solutions. They can present their plans to the school or the community, emphasize the importance of environmental stewardship, and then afterwards they can reflect on the effectiveness of their plans, what they learned, and how they can continue to make a positive impact.
Mhm.
So, the one
Mhm.
thing that you might think of if you're going to design something like this, which is what would
I could
those
always think of one thing.
what are some of the sustainability plans, or what are some of the things that you have available to you in the community? Do you have solar panel companies? Do you have wind power? Do you
You have
have
wetlands.
for
You live in
generate
amongst the wetlands.
how
Well,
would
I
you
mean, I was thinking about sustainability. Wetlands are imperative to sustainability.
Oh,
And
definitely.
so let's say you have kids who are duck hunters
Hmm.
and they really like their wetlands. Okay, well, there you go. It keeps our communities sustainable. It's good for our community. What are we going to do about wetlands? How could you know, work out plans to sustain some of your wetlands, to preserve them, to increase them if need be, things like that. That's a big, huge project that would really appeal to a kid who was like a hunter or really involved in it. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, are wetlands created through secession?
Succession? That's a phrase that I'm not. You mean seceding water per se, or
Well,
oh
you have
yeah,
a
I know what you're
pond,
saying.
and
Okay,
then eventually you have plant life that creeps in
yeah, okay.
to that
Oh,
pond.
oh,
And so,
cessation, CESS. Sorry. Yeah, more or less, and it creates its own echo. It creates its own environment, its
right.
ecosphere. Frogs and I live in a place called Grass Valley, which is wetland city. And when after it rains and it's a little warm lately, I got frogs because they're kind of dumb
Yeah.
frogs. But come spring and summer, holy cow, this place is like full of frogs. I got deer that live in the
Hmm.
thickets on the way on the wetlands, and it's really quite a little ecosphere there.
Yeah,
And
we have a lot of wetlands here. We get a lot of frogs in the summer. And
right,
we have cougar. We
sure,
have
yeah, we do
tons of
too.
coyotes. I take my dogs for a walk and we'll see the coyotes, and they don't like
Yeah.
me. I don't know why. I keep running over to them saying, "Come here." And then they run off.
Yeah, I'm surprised they even stay. A lot of them just walk away.
Um,
Yeah, they don't
well,
like
I
us.
have small
Wolves will not
dogs,
be
and
seen.
generally speaking, the coyotes will walk down the middle of the street right past us early in
Wow.
the morning or late at night. And yeah, we just have there's a ton of wildlife. When I first moved here,
Yeah.
it there was so much more, but with development and everything else,
Filled
it's
in
gotten the
wetlands.
traffic has just gotten incredibly more.
Yeah.
And
Which is our
so,
point, that sustainability of the earth includes the sustainability of wetlands and eco environments that, used to exist are now houses. Yeah.
mhm,
Deer are
yeah.
everywhere, if you've
So
noticed.
so there's so many things there, and so it really helps to bounce ideas off of other people.
There you
And
go.
are you going to assign homework on this? This is a huge one. If you
And
assign homework and have them take work home, how many of your students are going to be having their parents do some of their work for them?
there's that dynamic.
And I would caution you that all work stays there at school. And if parents are
Yeah.
upset, that tells you something right there.
Well,
So they can do
we're teaching
research
that
at home.
dynamic too. Yeah.
They can
We're
they
teaching
can
the
do
dynamic of working with the kids. So we want
right.
to be an overseer of that. You don't want that undermined by some kid going off having their parent hire out somebody to do work for the
Exactly.
kids. Like, whoa. Yeah. That's a big wrench coming from outside and then right into the gears.
My dad works for the Corps of Engineers, and this is what he came up with.
Yeah. I talked to my uncle Bob, who's, oh yeah, that's good, but he can't write it for you.
No. So you want to make sure that it's all doable within. If they
Yeah.
want to do extra out of class research, that's fine. They can talk to
Mm.
other people and then they can bring that into their
Yeah.
group. What
Which would
kinds
only
of,
make it better.
and then are you going to have different people come in, different conservatorship, conservationists come in and speak to your class? Are you going to take your class to different venues where they can explore and they can look? What are you going to do scientifically? Are you going to look at
As
some of
long
the
as it's relevant.
biomes? Are you going
As
to,
long as it's relevant. They want to get
yeah,
their project done and they don't want to waste time. So it's work for our project, I'm in.
Well, I think that it would work for everybody's project, and
Yeah.
there's going to be a small tie-in somehow. So you really want to have everything planned out. It's not something that you're going to say, I think I'll do this, and then tomorrow you just launch it with the kids.
Oh,
Have
no,
the
no,
whole
no.
thing planned out, the steps that you need, and have fudge room where you can put things in, but don't have everything down so that you know exactly what's going to happen every day. Maybe you have each week planned.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
And if you're
project-based, like you said, clear expectations and
right,
steps.
and if
And
you have 2 to
yeah,
3 weeks planned out, you can always
right.
nudge, you can always snuggle one week into another week that didn't take as long as the other one. And maybe something else is going to move a little bit longer. So just be open to that and just take notes. And just remember this too, that what works with one group of kids is not going to work with another group of kids. Every time that you
It's a
do this,
dynamic.
it's going to be completely different. I know this.
Yeah.
I made that mistake years ago. I
Mm.
we were doing a history project, and I gave it to one group of kids, and they went to town with it. They had the best time. They learned so much. And then 3 years later, I gave it to another group of students, and they looked at me like I was walking around with half a head.
Mhm.
And I said, "What's the matter?" And they said, "We don't get it." And I said, "Well, this is how we're going to do it." And I had everything clearly laid out. And they just said, "Yeah, it just doesn't work for us." And
You got to read
so,
the room, I guess. Yeah.
yeah. And so what I
Or
had to do was I
maybe
had
you
to
do a
pull back
pre-lesson.
because I
Yeah.
had my expectations were too well defined. I had everything
Yeah.
down to what exactly I wanted them to do, and I hadn't given them enough license.
To create.
Now, with some students, though, they wanted me to be even more specific because they didn't know how to deal with decision making. So we had to go into that, and they didn't
Yeah.
trust themselves. So there are so many different issues that you might run into.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
just be
Yeah. There's
prepared for
different
that.
classes.
Hmm.
They change. You got to teach some other skills sometimes. Yeah.
They are their own ecosystem.
They are their own ecosystem.
Okay,
A
so
force
we
to be
also have a
reckoned with.
project for historical inquiry and museum
Mhm.
exhibition, another one for entrepreneurship, business plan project. And, you know, there are just different ways that you can do things, but you're going to get the language arts, you're going to get the math, you're going to get the science, and you're going to be able to build in art. You're going to be, you know, why can't you put in some PE and some walking or something that goes on? But there should be a lot of motion. There should be a lot of action going on in your classroom.
Yeah, it should be
And
very
so
hands-on.
make sure that you're doing a lot with that. So next week, we are taking this a step further. And we are going to talk about what the differences are between project-based learning, career and technical education, and vocational education.
Mhm.
Because it's really simple to have all of these tangled up. So we're going to have a discussion about that. And in 2 weeks, we will be talking about assessment and grading practices. So please join us then. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that like button. Leave us a review and leave us a like if you are on podcast or if you're on YouTube. And with that being said, Philip, thank you so much.
Aloha. Thank you.
And until then, reach for the stars, keep your feet on the ground. Bye-bye.